Hello, this is Dr. James Hayes-Bohanan. I'm recording a supplement here for the Geography 381 Latin America class at Bridgewater State University. I normally show the slide presentation, Rondônia, a Real Place, as part of the class, and I talk along with it to explain the slides. Since we are not meeting in class, I'm going to record a series of short videos rather than trying to get through the whole presentation at once. I'm going to record a few, starting with slide 1, and I'll record a few now, and then we'll pick up later. So this is part 1 of Rondônia, a Real Place. I'm going to go over to the actual slides, and I will just speak over them. So I described this as Rondônia, a Real Place, because it's always struck me that this sounds like a made-up name. Rondon was a military officer in Brazil who was pretty widely respected both by indigenous and other people in Brazil. And the territory in the Western Amazon, that's the subject of my dissertation research back in the 90s, was called Rondônia in his honor. And the people of Rondônia still seem to be pretty comfortable with that name. Actually, it should be pronounced Rondônia or Rondônia, depending upon which part of Brazil the speaker is from. And I'm showing you here an image that's about 1.5 foot or 2 foot wide painting carving that hangs in my living room in Bridgewater. This is the only real souvenir I brought back from my first trip to Brazil. And it is by an artist named Anka. Even getting to Anka's house was an adventure, and there in the slide is a link to meeting Anka. And by the way, if you're seeing this video, you should have a link to the slides as well. And the slides contain a number of links. I'm not going to pursue them while I talk, at least not all of them. But if you see a link, or if I call attention to a link, please read that later. This is the story of meeting Anka is fun. It's a fun little story, but it's a bit of a digression here. I might wrap up with the Anka story. Notice also in this slide show that I have put numbers on all the slides. So if you want to refer to anything, if you have a question about anything, jot down that slide number. It'll help us know what you're talking about, for example. And if you reference it in a discussion board, especially reference the slide number rather than saying the slide that looked like the trees or something like that. So just to show you, Rondônia is a real place. It's about the size of the US state of Arizona, which is where I was pursuing my PhD at the time I went to Rondônia. I was in the state of Arizona. I went to the state of Rondônia. They're roughly the same size, just as the country of Brazil is almost the size of the continental United States, if you exclude Alaska. So that's the proportions, something like that. Brazil's a little smaller than the continental US, but that gives you a rough idea. And most of the population of Brazil is along the Atlantic coast. It was settled by the Portuguese. A lot of the indigenous people of Brazil were lost when the Portuguese arrived, and that settlement of the Portuguese was all from the coasts. The area shown here in kind of a mustard yellow is that eastern and southeastern part of Brazil. The green is called the North, or the Amazon. Amazon refers to several different things in Brazil. It is the name of the river that's in the center of this area, the north central part. So Amazon can refer to the river. It can refer to the group of states that include Amazonas and Pará and Rondônia, Mato Grosso, Maranhão, Goiás, Acre, Roraima, and Rondônia. Those states are considered the Amazon. The Amazon is also the network of rivers. There are over 1,000 rivers that flow into the Amazon. Rivers big enough to have names. There are thousands of unnamed rivers in the basin. And then finally, Amazon refers to all of the land drained by those rivers as they flow toward the Amazon River. Those lands that drain to the Amazon are found not only in Brazil, but in neighboring countries. So Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, which isn't even on this map, Colombia, Venezuela, and all Guyana, Suriname, and French Guyana all have part of that Amazon basin. So when we say the Amazon, that can mean a lot of different things. And I often specify Brazilian Amazon if I'm referring to these issues that I'm talking about. On the right is a cover of a trade book, a small book that we published, my friends in the Amazon and I published in 2001. It's called Olhares sobre a Amazônia. And if you click that link in the slideshow, you'll be taken to a page where I describe the book. And if you click again, you'll see my chapter that was a contribution, just a short chapter, comparing what happened in the Amazon in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, comparing that experience to what happened in the US Western frontier areas in the 1860s, 70s, and 90s. My chapter is called What a Difference a Century Makes. But this book collectively is written in both Portuguese and English, depending upon the language of each writer. All of us are bilingual to some degree, but we wrote in our home languages articles about different aspects of how the Amazon is viewed from outside. The lead scholar in this article is my friend Dr. Miguel Neneve, who is a professor of English in Brazil, and he has been fascinated, as I have been, with how the Amazon is represented. So this book is really about a literary critique of the Amazon and how it's represented in literature and in media and in popular culture. It's a thin, but we think very important book, and it was very popular within Brazil. It sold out almost immediately back in 2001. It wasn't until 2019 that I returned to the Amazon to follow up on the book. In 2019, after the our summer of Amazon fires, I was invited to come back and again by Dr. Neneve and to follow up on this idea of how the Amazon is perceived from outside. So my talk for that meeting in the Amazon about the Amazon is called Fogo, Política, Beef e Soja, meaning fire, politics, beef, and soy. And there's a link there to a whole separate presentation about that. I said I didn't go back till 2019, meaning I didn't go back to talk about this issue until 2019. I did my 3 trips to the Amazon prior to that were 1996. I did my dissertation research. 2000, I returned with my family for a few weeks to do some follow-up research and to work on this book. And then in 2003, I did take an undergraduate at Bridgewater State College student, a biology student, to do a small ecology project also in Rondônia. So I had 3 trips to Rondônia before I went anywhere else in Brazil. Since then, I've spent a lot of my time in the south of Brazil in Santa Catarina state, in a city called Florianopolis. And it was not until 2019 that I went back to my original haunts in the Amazon. And I hope to get back very soon. While I was in the Amazon, this is another friend of mine, a friend I have in common with Dr. Neneve. He introduced me to Professor Walter here, who was my host for my first and third visits to the Amazon. I stayed in a room in his house in this city. This is the city of Porto Velho, which means the old port. And it is named for this area of the city on the Rio Madeira. Madeira means wood. This is the Wood River. And I thought that's because it flows through the wooded area of the Amazon, but it's more specific than that. People who are pilots on this river, who travel up and down the river, call it the Wood River because of the danger of floating trees. This part of the Amazon has a wet season and a dry season. It's at 9 degrees south. So The summer there is the opposite of our summer. So in the June, July, and August, the rains are heavy, the river rises up, and when it does, it picks up trees that might have fallen along the rivers and all their tributaries during, say, January, February. They get suspended in the river, and these are huge trees just floating down the river in muddy water. So piloting a boat is a pretty risky activity here, but it's also the only way to get around. We are at a place called Menanches, which is kind of a new development in this part of the Amazon. It's just a high bluff where you can look out over the river. Menanches means the view, and people like to go up here, and we're at a little bar restaurant where people like to have a sunset. And you can also go down and take a river cruise, which I've done with Walter on another occasion. What I'm not sure about right now is if we went back to this site, whether the view would be like this, because at around the edge of the view here, there's now a hydroelectric dam, which should not be there at all, in my opinion. If somebody knows a little bit about dams, there should not be a dam there, but there is. Anyway, more about Walter is in my newsletter that I had sent back that's linked from a previous page, and more about the river as well. Let me move on. I won't play this song, but I really encourage you to give a listen. I'm not sure, I don't think the audio would work so well here, so I'm going through Zoom, so I will invite you to click through to this song, Now Rio Mais, which has a double meaning in Portuguese. It means no more river, but it also means not smiling anymore. And it's kind of a joke, but it also speaks to the complexity of the Amazon basin. It starts with saying that the Amazon is the Negro, the Black River. The Solomões, you will find there. The Amazon River is formed by the union of these two rivers, the Negro and the Solomões. I'll talk about them a little bit on the next slide. But they come together at the city of Manaus to form the Amazon River. And then he describes here in this very funny sort of song how as you go down the river, you encounter all of these other tributaries I mentioned, Tocantins, the Pororoca, the Caninanha, and the São Francisco, the Mucuri, the Paranaíba, the Canga, all of these kind of funny sounding names, and it's sort of just a riff on all of those. And then he says, I've named all the rivers, and now there are no more rivers. It's kind of a joke in Portuguese, and it's just fun to listen to. I encourage you to do that. So this is a satellite composite. It's a bunch of different satellite images. That's why it looks a little bit patchy, because it is a patchwork. There's no one image that will show you the Amazon in this way. For one thing, there's always rain somewhere over the Amazon and rain clouds. And if you take a satellite image at any given time, a lot of the river basin is going to be covered with rain clouds. And so to get an image of the whole region, you need to patch together images taken at different times. Also, images detailed enough to show you deforestation patterns aren't going to cover the whole region. So that's why this is a composite. Blue on this image, blue in the river represents silty rivers that would actually look like chocolate milk if you saw a true color image, but this is a pretty common practice in satellite images. At the very left or westernmost edge of the screen are the Andes Mountains, and a lot of these rivers flow down from the Andes, carrying quite a lot of sediment and looking like chocolate milk. On the north side of the screen is the Guyana Highlands, which are not nearly as high, and the rivers that flow from there are flowing very slowly and gently, and often look like black tea with nothing added to them. And the inset that I have here showing the city of Manaus, it's showing what I mentioned before, the convergence of the Rio Negro, the Black River, coming in from the northwest, and the Solimões coming in from the south and southwest, from the west and southwest. And they merge together at what's called the Wedding of the Waters in Manaus. And at this point, the two rivers are flowing slowly and deeply, and they are not mixing for about 30 miles. I'm going to add a link so that if you click on that image, you will be taken to a separate blog post I've written about that with some video. This was one of the first things I got to see when I arrived in Brazil in 1996. I stood in the dock in Manaus, looked out across the water, and saw the silty Solimões flowing by. Two rivers in the same channel, not mixing. I want to talk a little bit about the phrase that I have at the bottom of the screen, Sistema de Avimento. And if you click on that in the slideshow, you will see an article in Portuguese about what this refers to, the Sistema de Avimento, which means the system of rubber tapping or rubber collection that was present in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. And right up to almost the present day, I've actually met rubber tappers who were part of it. And basically what happens is in this basin, there's a Havea, the rubber tree grows throughout the Amazon basin, but scattered. If rubber trees are planted close together, they develop crop diseases and they die. So to get rubber from rubber trees in the Amazon, you have to go out into the forest, tap the individual trees, and collect the rubber. This is a very labor-intensive process, and it uses a small amount of trees scattered over a large amount of land. Adds up to a large amount of trees, but in any given square mile, there's only going to be a few trees. And so there are literally men who walk around in the woods, collect the rubber, bring it back to their home, and keep it by the side of a river. And every month or two, maybe 6 months, a small boat will come and collect that rubber and then give the rubber tapper, as the person is called, payment, maybe in the form of machete or pottery, maybe money, but probably in terms of goods. And that person with the small boat will take the rubber that he has collected, and this is all men, as far as I am aware, doing most of this trade. He'll take it down to a small village where a bigger boat will come and collect the rubber from him. And eventually this gets collected in two cities, Manaus and Belém. And at the peak of the rubber boom, when natural rubber from Brazil was the only rubber in the world, these were two of the richest cities in the world. At least the people at the top of this trade were very, very wealthy because they were collecting rubber from a vast area. This is like the size of the Mississippi basin, collecting rubber from small producers all over the basin. And this is what was the main commerce and the main population throughout the Amazon up until the middle of the 20th century, when the Brazilian government started to think about ways to get more people into the Amazon. This was a very low density population. The combination of the people who did this trade, who are called caboclos, and various dozens or hundreds of different indigenous groups dispersed throughout the Amazon region. And the Amazon problem of deforestation comes about later, when there's an effort to deliberately bring people in to settle these lands for agriculture. So that's the first part of my narration of my Amazon slides. I'm going to stop here, and part two will pick up with the next slide.